Hello there, I'm Simon. Welcome to my channel. Today's topic is vampires. One specific vampire. You may or may not know that the vampire genre did not in fact start with Twilight, but rather with Bram Stoker's Dracula. Let's be honest, you probably knew that. But I'm not sure how many people have actually read that book. If my audience was in any way big enough for such a thing, I would have done a poll among all my followers to see how many of you have read it. But as it is, I'm just gonna have to assume no one's read it. So, sorry if you have, I suppose. So, the story of Dracula starts with a guy called Jonathan Harker, an English notary who's on his way to Transylvania, which, if my Latin serves me correctly, means across the forests. But that's beside the point. He's been invited by a count called Dracula, who wants his advice, because he's moving to London. But while he's staying there, well, let's just say weird things happen. Scary things. Downright terrifying things. Things that imply, without any shadow of a doubt really, that the count is not a normal human being. If he's even human at all. But luckily, John escapes. And at that point, our point of view switches to England. We get the correspondence between a lady called Lucy Westenra and Mina Harker, who turns out to be John's fiancée. Lucy has just been proposed to by 3 different men. And then weird things start happening. Because of course weird things happen. This is Dracula, what did you expect? The thing is that those things kinda get Lucy in trouble, and she gets rather sick. So Mina and the 3 lovers kinda form a team to keep her alive. Turns out that's extremely difficult, however. So they get in an expert called Abraham Van Helsing, who does not in fact look like Wolverine. He looks more like Dr. Henry Jones Sr. Like, he's smart, but he's not fighting Drac. That's why we've got the Young Squad. Abe does, however, discover what we the readers already knew. That Miss Westenra is a victim of a vampire. And at that point, John returns from Transylvania, along with his entire diary. Oh, and Lucy dies. Sorta. But Mina then reads his diary, rude, and together with Abe, she kinda pieces together what happened and what's going on. And using that diary and the letters between her and Lucy, they kinda puzzle together a sort of narrative of sorts, which they put into a book, which Mina then copies for all the guys. And that's how the entire team learns of what happened. And that's when they form a vampire hunting squad to fight Drac. And I'm not gonna tell you what happened next, because I'm not Bram Stoker. But trust me, you should read the book. But that, to me, is the most interesting thing about this book. That collection of diary entries, letters, newspaper articles, telegrams, etc. that they put together for themselves. Just so happens to be the thing we as readers just read. Like, we are reading those exact texts that the characters read and wrote within the story. And that continues for the rest of the book. And that's a level of storytelling that I don't see a lot. I mean, there's a lot of books that try it, that give a context for when and how the story came to be written down and is being told. Sherlock Holmes, from what I've read, is the memoirs of Watson. The Kane Chronicles has a slightly more modern version of this. But from what I've seen, it's never as well executed or as deep as Dracula. And don't get me wrong, I'm not saying a book needs that. It's just that I myself really like it. But that gives this story a sort of found footage feeling, or at least a literary version of it. These texts are not simply a carriage for telling the story. They are the thoughts and feelings of these characters in that moment. And they exist within the story. And that makes it feel incredibly real. The other interesting thing about this way of storytelling is that the different points of view gives it an interesting combination of incomplete knowledge for the narrator and yet an overview of the big picture that's complete enough. Something that I believe is called dramatic irony, except it's not drama, it's prose. Anyway, the fact that Stoker writes from several characters and lets them speak means that all of these characters have to be developed mostly equally. At least enough to give them all a different voice. And because he lets all of them talk, that means there's basically no real main characters. They're all the main characters. It's kinda like Dungeons and Dragons in that way. Okay, that's not entirely true. Mina and John are clearly the main characters. But that's more of a retrospective assessment than a feeling that's there while reading the book. Does that make sense? Yes, it does. I think the biggest difficulty with this writing style is to maintain a balance between the personal writing of the character and the bigger narrative. Also to keep it realistic that a character would write that way, while also keeping it interesting and attractive to read. Like, it needs to be realistic that the character would be writing these words and would know those things, but you also have a story to tell, and you want it to be read. That, and you'd have to keep finding new opportunities for your characters to sit down and actually write. And you have to figure out which character and what medium is the most interesting and beneficial for your story. Can you tell I'm not just talking about Dracula anymore? So let's get back on topic, shall we? In fact, let's talk a little bit about the history behind it. Because welcome to my channel. Now, most people will tell you that the inspiration for Dracula was this guy called Vlad Tepes. And he did actually get the nickname Dracula. Of course, at that time, the name wasn't synonymous with vampires. That wouldn't happen until Stoker. The name actually comes from Vlad's dad, Vlad, who got the nickname Dracula because he joined an order called the Order of the Dragon. Does that mean all members took a nickname that sounded like dragon? Well, actually, I think it has to do with the fact that Vlad Sr. was an illegitimate son, which meant that he needed something like that to make him more legit. Anyway, that's why Tepes is called Dracula, because he's Dracula's son. Also, Tepes isn't his last name. It's just a Romanian word for impaler, because he liked impaling people. Mainly Ottomans, who invaded his country. And it's implied that the Count, from the book, is in fact Tepes, because when John Harker meets him, he does talk about his supposed ancestor and his deeds in fighting the Ottomans, as if it was himself. So yeah, safe to say that Count Dracula is in fact Vlad Tepes, if only to give him a grounding in ancient history. Before I wrap this up, I want to touch on one more thing. Now, this may be me just reading too much into it, or it may be Stoker being a little obvious in his writing. I genuinely don't know. But have you noticed that there is this one character who is the expert in all things vampire? Which is very useful in a story where the main villain is a vampire. And his name just so happens to be Abraham, which is the longer version of Bram, the name of the author. Coincidence? Maybe. But I for one find it a little too coincidental. My theory, which may or may not be a thing in the literary world already, is that Abraham Van Helsing was in fact a sort of self-insert used by Stoker to help along the plot, to help steer it in the right direction, by giving the squad information that they could never figure out on their own. Except, he's not just that. Apart from that, he's also an interesting character. And I dare say, he might just be my favorite. And all that is why I believe Dracula to be a masterpiece. So, what are you waiting for? If you haven't already read it, go do that now. Go on. And that brings me to the YouTube thing. First one of the year, so let's make it a good one. You know the drill, people. Please let me know down below what you think of this book, or what other books you might like me to talk about. You can also click that like button below, or I suppose you can click the dislike button if you really have to. If you like nerdy stuff, you can go to my channel and check out everything on there. And if it pleases you, why not subscribe? Also make sure to click that bell so it counts. And please share this video with all your friends, family, neighbors, pets, enemies, etc. Just spread it far and wide across the interwebs, because that's the word now. Oh, and down below you can find my sources and my socials. Which leaves me with this. Thanks for watching.